Great. Well, we'll get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming, and we're really excited to speak with you here today as part of Civic Learning Week, which is hosted by iCivics, and really seeks to highlight the importance of civic education to sustain and strengthen constitutional democracy. And in that context, we're really excited to speak with you a bit more today about civic learning in the context of climate change. Before we dive in, just a few kind of housekeeping notes. So we're going to be taking you through some slides, but we also want to do some Q&A at the end. So, if questions come up as you're going along, please just use that Q&A tab in the Zoom, and we'll gather them and we'll get to them at the end. Um, and then, also, we're going to be sharing out some helpful links in the chat and going through some slides, but this session will be recorded and sent out, and a list of links will be sent out to you. So, don't feel like a rush to open up all the links or anything, or take screenshots of slides that you don't want to miss. We'll send it all out to you. But yeah, without further ado, we'll dive right in. I'll just start by introducing myself a little bit. And so my name's Ian Gilchrist. I'm the Associate Director of Content with the Education Department at the Council on Foreign Relations. And I've been at the council for about 5 years, producing a range of educational content from articles to simulations to online games. My background is actually in history and Cold War studies, actually, which is a little circuitous, but of course, leading the content team, I've been able to write about all different kinds of topics, one of them including climate change recently. So, get a little bit more into that journey further in, but I also want to pass it over to my co-host, Dennis Lasco with earthday.org.
Thank you, Ian. So my name is Dennis Lasco. I'm an education coordinator with earthday.org. I've been here for about 2 years now. So a little bit about Earth Day. Well, I'll get into the history later. But one of the things that we do is we create resources for educators to use to teach about climate change in the classroom. And we also do a little bit of policy work, which I'll get into as well a little later on, trying to promote access to climate education in the classroom. But just a little bit about my background. I was a classroom educator for several years. I taught middle school English. It was a great time. I always, even though I taught English, I always tried to embed a little bit of climate change into my lessons. And so I had a whole unit dedicated to it. And that's what kind of sparked my interest in doing this line of work and then led me to Earth Day. So yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit more about history of Earth Day, some of the resources that we have, and then some actions that you all can take to help out.
Great, yeah. And just to give you a bit of background about CFR Education generally, so like I said, we make up the educational arm of the Council on Foreign Relations, which, is, you may know, is a foreign policy think tank, kind of first and foremost. But what we do is create resources to support educators and students to learn about the fundamentals of global affairs. So, we work with experts on the council, with instructors on our staff, and, with our own content creation team to produce free learning and teaching materials for students and for educators. And this includes, written articles, primers on core topics, role play activities, backgrounders, videos, really all manner of topics and kind of types of content. Um, and also we're focused on, providing professional development for teachers. So that includes webinars, professional development events, classroom teaching resources, and all that. And just to sort of tie our work back to this theme of civic learning, we really view our mission as one of kind of generating civic engagement. We try to give students the knowledge, skills, and perspectives that they need to be informed participants in today's world, and be more engaged citizens. But I'll pass it over to you, Dennis, to tell us a bit more about earthday.org.
Yeah, definitely. So it's actually a big year for us this year. It is the 55th anniversary of Earth Day, so April 22nd, just a little over a month away. But you know, Earth Day is really rooted in civic engagement. It started in 1970, and actually a little bit before that, where people were seeing how much pollution there was happening in the world, and they wanted to do something about it, especially the youth. So Senator Gaylord Nelson worked together with Dennis Hayes, who was a student activist, and they organized for a series of teach-ins to be to happen all across the country in 1970. And so they were able to get to activate 20 million students, people all across the country to advocate for the earth and for better environmental policies. And actually, as a result of the very first Earth Day, the EPA was created. Lots of environmental protection laws came as a result of that. And yeah, every year there was more and more engagement on that front. And even today, we still are very much rooted in action. And so, Earth Day, you might think about planting trees, about doing a cleanup in your community. But a big part of what we do at the education team is we try to bring climate education into the classroom. So like I mentioned earlier, we try to do that by creating resources for educators, especially resources for subject areas where you might not think you can tie in climate education. We also, like I said earlier, we promote policy, so climate education policy. Right now, actually, and I'll get into this a little bit later, there's only one state in the US that has climate education embedded in the standards for all subject areas, all grade levels. We'll see if anybody knows that answer in the chat, which state is the only one that mandates that. But yeah, so Earth Day is very much rooted in taking action and yeah.
Right, awesome. I didn't know all that either. This is good learning for me as well. So now that we've, introduced ourselves a little bit, we want to know a little bit more about where you stand. So we have a few poll questions for you, if you'll bear with us. And the first is, do you want to teach about climate change in the classroom? And feel free to put your response in. We'll give you about 30 seconds or so.
Oh, we have a couple of people though in the know in the chat there. They know the answers. It is New Jersey, and I'm going to touch on that a little
Oh,
bit
wow.
later.
No
Yeah,
way.
interesting that people mention California though too. You'd think California has it embedded in the standards, but they do not yet. But we are working on that. We are working on that, and I'll explain some of the things that we're doing to get that in the standards.
Great. I'll just looks like we've got a good number of responses here, so I'll go in. So it looks like we have pretty unanimous support for yes, which hopefully makes sense given the nature of our discussion. But this is actually we're outperforming the national average here. So one sort of interesting figure I've come across is there was a 2022 survey of teachers done um, that saw that about three-quarters of K through 12 teachers, agreed that schools had a responsibility to teach about climate change. So, you're in good company, but we're beating the average, which is nice. Dennis, I'll pass it over to you for the next question.
Yeah, definitely. So a little poll should pop up again, but do you feel like your students want to learn about climate change? So take a couple of seconds there, but yes, no, maybe. I think, I don't know, Ian, if you can pull up the results. If
Yeah,
people have,
looks like we're getting there.
again, unanimous there. So
Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So the statistic that I like to bring up is that 65% of students say that they want to learn more about climate change. So a lot of times they maybe touch on it a little bit in science class. And I can see Carter there mentioned that it is currently embedded in the science education standards. A lot of states, especially those that follow next generation science standards, they do touch on it. In science class, but on average, students are getting only about 2 hours of climate change education per year. And so we definitely think that number should increase. And I think a lot of students, like I said, that 65% want to learn more. And this is where you all can help and bring it into your own classrooms.
Yeah. And lastly, and maybe this is the one where we'll get a little bit more disagreement, but we'll see. Is how prepared do you feel as an educator to teach about climate change? So this is on a scale of 1 to 5, one being the least prepared, 5 being the most. So take a few seconds and tell us how you feel. Interesting. I'll give about 10 more. Okay, yeah. And we can share these results out. So it looks like there's a bit more of a range here. Few people don't feel very prepared. Nice to see a few folks feel very prepared. That's good. But and also nice to see that no one feels not at all prepared. But for anyone who feels underprepared, you're far from alone. The same survey that I was looking at and talking about earlier found that 80% of administrators and educators, although they want to teach about climate change in the classroom, they feel unprepared to do so, either for lack of curricular support or uncertainty about state guidelines and policies, but variety of reasons. But there's a sort of lack of preparation. So good to see that we're also beating the averages here a little bit, but you know, definitely something that we're going to talk a bit more about as we go through. But yeah, so thanks for participating in those questions, setting that tone out. But with all this information in mind, I want to dive into essentially kind of the core question of this session, which is why are we talking about climate change for Civic Learning Week? Why is it understanding climate change a part of civic education at all? And Dennis and I both have some thoughts on this, and I want to pass it over to him first to start. But as we speak, also feel free to add some perspectives that you might have in the chat. Love to hear your thoughts as well. But yeah, Dennis, over to you.
Yeah, definitely. So over at Earth Day in our education department, we have our three main pillars as to why understanding climate change is so important. The first reason is to deal with student anxiety. So lots of kids, when you talk to them today about climate change, they feel very anxious about it. Many students are getting their information on social media, which can sometimes make it even scarier. And so we think it's really important that students get that information from a trusted adult, from a reliable source like their teachers. Confronting that kind of climate anxiety is really important. Another reason also is to help students build sustainable habits. So, by getting this message from the time they're in kindergarten until they're, graduating high school, kind of reinforcing those habits that they can do, turning off the lights when they are leaving a room or carrying some kind of water bottle. Just kind of reinforcing those sustainable habits from an early age. We think that's very important as well. And then finally, preparing students for the green economy. Um, the green economy is growing by billions of dollars every year, but many students aren't aware of this. I love to pull out the statistic with these students that the fastest growing job, projected to be the fastest growing job in the United States over the next 10 years, is wind power technician. So, those giant kind of windmills. A lot of students don't realize that that job is going to be in high demand over the next couple of years. And so, preparing students for the green economy is another reason why it's important that they understand climate change.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Dennis. And I had no idea about the demand for wind technicians. I mean, I sort of can imagine it, but it's a shocking kind of figure. So obviously, I completely agree with all that. But let me add sort of some of my own perspective. For me, it's a question I've gotten to think about a lot. Over the last 6 months or so, CFR Education has been making a really big push to cover climate change in a way that we haven't before. So we've published a whole new library of resources covering the topic. And on top of that, we're working on a set of online courses with Coursera to cover the topic as well. And although we've worked very closely with experts on the council to produce these resources, like I said at the top, I'm not really a climate expert myself. I have my background in studying the Cold War and Russian history. Um, and so turning into someone who writes about climate change over the last 6 months has really made me think about, why it is that it's so important to us to cover and by extension for students to learn about. And in a way, I think my answer to that is really in the question itself. Civic education is about preparing students to face the issues of the world. To understand how the world works and to be able to participate confidently, as a citizen. And climate change is sort of the issue facing us in the 21st century. And against that backdrop, it's sort of become clear to me that we don't have the luxury of saying that's not my area of focus, that's not my area of expertise. To be an informed and engaged citizen today means understanding climate change. So I'm a subject of that process as well as hoping, hopefully helping address it. But and it's more than just sort of understanding the background of the science of climate change, but it's also about understanding how it shapes societies, how it shapes politics, and how action on climate change can be taken. And to apply sort of a lens from my own background on this, people have at CFR have advocated that climate change should be considered as a threat on the scale of nuclear war. Um, and to bring that back to the Cold War, looking at what happened to American education after the launch of Sputnik and the start of the space race, um, Congress poured billions of dollars into education and adopted a series of reforms, aimed at sort of responding to this crisis. And not all of those reforms were successful, but the idea behind them is pretty important, which is that leaders realized that we needed, a society that could meet the challenges of a changed world, face the threat that was at hand and be prepared to address it. And really that's, as I think about climate change, that's what I think we need today. We need an education system that understands climate change for the threat that it is, and works to empower students with tools to, navigate that world, and engage with the issue rather than give way to, anxiety or even despair. Um, and we also need an education system that doesn't, confine climate change to science classrooms,
Mhm.
but, one that acknowledges how the issue is transforming society, how it's affecting politics, how it's affecting the economy, to Dennis's point, so that students can actually enter this world and participate in it. And just to shamelessly self-plug here, this is actually the topic of a recent blog post that we authored in partnership with 10 Strands, which is a California-based nonprofit. So if you're interested in learning about that a bit more, I definitely encourage you to check it out. It looks like we posted it in the chat here. So, but yeah, that's sort of the background that I'm coming from. But with all that said, the question that kind of stems from all of this is how can we bring climate change into civic learning? And here I think there's really three main things to discuss. So the first is preparing yourselves as educators. And from my end, this is something that, we at CFR Education put a lot of emphasis on. I've already sort of discussed some of it, but, we hold a lot of professional development events, webinars, produce resources for teachers to help them bring climate change into the classroom. And we're going to continue to do a lot more events in the near future. So, definitely keep your eyes out. Um, but, like I said on our website, we're also aiming to provide a lot of teaching support, be they teaching materials, curriculum alignment lists so that you can better incorporate our resources into your classes, essay and discussion questions, classroom activities, all things that can sort of help address that how prepared do you feel question that we were asking, make you kind of a more confident educator on the topic. But this is also something that I know earthday.org focuses on too. So I'll pass it over to you, Dennis, to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I just wanted to also touch on your Sputnik moment, by the way. That is funny that you mentioned that because that's exactly what Kathleen Rogers, the president of Earth Day, says. It's kind of our Sputnik moment. Instead of kind of feeling anxiety, it's kind of to embrace this moment and come in with a solutions-based mindset. Okay, how do we tackle this challenge head on? And come out successful on the other side. So I really love that you brought that up, Demo, and I'll have to definitely share that blog post with her. She'll love it. But yeah, on and at Earth Day, so I'm going to give a little bit of background about myself again. Like I said, I was an English teacher, middle school English teacher, but I recognize that climate change is something that's going to touch every aspect of our life. And the great thing about the education team at Earth Day is that we're all former educators from diverse backgrounds. None of us, have a degree in environmental science, but we do understand that this is an issue that educators want to bring into the classroom. And so when we created our professional development, so this is the School Guide to Climate Education, we recognize that a lot of times teachers can feel this kind of pressure to bring in climate education. They want to bring it in, but they feel it's one more thing that's already on top of everything else that they're already doing. So the way that we created this is to take existing lessons that they already have and kind of reframing it through a climate education lens. So the example that I love to give is, as an English teacher, that's kind of my wheelhouse. Bringing in a book, my favorite book that I love to show my students was one called 2 Degrees, and it was a kind of action-packed story, but it touched on climate change. The whole focus is how these students in different parts of the world, and California, they were dealing with wildfires, and Florida, they're dealing with hurricanes, kind of how they all faced the crises happening in their backyard. Um, Spoiler, it does have a positive outcome. Um, but again, that's a way that like an English teacher could bring in climate change education into their classroom. Um, and again, it touches on all of 3 skills. So like I said, the mental well-being, the sustainable habits, the green skills, green economy. So again, the key thing for me in this professional development is that teachers aren't adding something on top of what they're already doing. It's kind of just putting a new lens on some of their existing lessons, which definitely makes it more approachable. So definitely check it out. It's on our website. I think there's going to be a link posted on there. But just as Ian mentioned earlier, and you all indicate in the poll, people want to bring this topic into the classroom. And there's lots of different ways to bring it in that doesn't seem overwhelming.
Yeah, thanks. And the second kind of prong of what we think about is on top of preparing yourself as an educator, it's about preparing students in the classroom. And from our end at CFR Education, that really means giving them resources to cover these topics that are often unfamiliar and potentially a little hard to digest. So to that end, I really want to highlight our library of learning resources on climate change that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So this new collection contains 35 separate resources. That includes, text articles, multimedia content, including infographics, data visualizations, a rich set of photos to illustrate everything, and then also, some videos that we've been producing. Um, and we break these into 6 separate topics that all focus on climate change in various aspects. These go over, of course, the fundamental science, but they really also take a primary focus on the implications of climate change around the world, strategies that societies and governments can use to address them, and what kind of tools that people have at their disposal as they think about climate change. So to give you an example of these resources, here's our set of resources that specifically focused on policy opportunities and obstacles that various levels of government face when they're thinking about climate change. So that goes over international agreements, it goes over how regulations work, it goes over some of the sort of nitty-gritty stuff that students might be unfamiliar with, like carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which I promise we cover in a very fun and engaging way. That is something that is often, I think, covered in a somewhat dry way that we're hopefully able to make a little bit more interesting. But we cover topics like climate finance, issues of justice and equity in climate policies, and just a range of other content, and that's all kind of packaged here. But this is just one set of the 6. We also go over energy policy issues, various strategies for mitigating and adapting to climate change, and hopefully a fairly just comprehensive overview of all of the various aspects of climate change in society. On top of these resources, we also have several climate-related simulations that you can run in your classroom to role play as policymakers facing climate issues. So these include, overarching policy issues like debating the Paris Agreement, or more acute, sort of smaller scenarios like addressing hurricanes in the Caribbean or stopping deforestation. And these allow your students to sort of step into the shoes of policymakers whether through the US policymaking mechanism, the President's National Security Council, or internationally through the UN Security Council, and really kind of explore the issues that stand in the way of effective climate policy, and give students sort of an inside perspective about the challenges involved there. Um, and if, on top of all these resources, if you're interested in learning more, I mentioned our Coursera coverage, which is a set of 3 climate-related courses that are going to be published in April. So if you're interested in checking those out, keep an eye out for those. They're going to be really exciting and have a number of content that's here on our website, but also some new videos and some new content there. And these are just our resources again. So I'll pass it back to you, Dennis, to talk about how earthday.org is bringing climate change into the classroom for students.
Yeah. So this is a project I'm very proud to be a part of, and CFR played a role in this as well. So you can see there, a number of us put together this Earth Month calendar. So what it has lessons for every single day in April, Earth Month, um, all grade levels, all subject areas. So you can click on any day there, and it'll pull up lesson. So it could be a lesson from Earth Day. It could be a lesson from CFR. I love those simulations, by the way, Ian. Those are fantastic. And I know that some people in the chat can also vouch for it. But yeah, so this is definitely a great resource that you can share with your teams and have them use them during the entire month of April. So that's one great resource that we definitely recommend anybody in this webinar use. The other resource I was going to talk about was our Earth Day Educator Representatives campaign. So one thing that we are putting together is we're putting together a coalition of educators who, if you sign up for this, you'll get a series of free educational resources that we create. Lots of different, again, grade level for every grade level, for every subject area. And then what we'll do is we do a showcase where we're going to host it on our website, and you can see kind of like a little carousel of all the different projects that students are working on. So it's a really great opportunity not only to highlight and showcase some of the work that you're doing in the classroom, but then also connect with a community of educators all over the world, just kind of seeing what people are doing in other parts. So definitely, I highly recommend using the Earth Month calendar and also signing up to be an educator representative so that you can get some of those free resources online.
And well, first, I've just been seeing a lot of love for the simulations in the chat, and I'll just say that my origin at CFR was actually exclusively working on these simulations, so they hold a very soft spot in my heart as well. So really glad to see the appreciation for them. But for this third point, I really want to let you take the wheel here, Dennis, because I think this is really what earthday.org is doing best.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, so we have our Earth Day Representatives campaign. So again, you'll receive tons of free resources. But the great thing also that we're doing is highlighting in a showcase any of the student-generated projects that you all do. We have 4 different topics. So actually, and one thing about Earth Day this year, so every year we do a different theme. So last year it was the End Plastics campaign. So we had tons of resources online about plastics. And so that is one of the topics that you could talk about with your students. Oop, wait, sorry, if we go back. Oh, there we go. And then fast fashion, that's always a really popular one with with students and educators all around the world. This year, our theme is all about renewable energy. So we have lots of guides, lots of kind of one-pagers and explainers for middle school students, elementary school students, about explaining, different types of renewable energy. And then we also have a couple of resources about food prints. So those are definitely some of the topics that you can talk about. And then again, if you submit project that you and your students do together, then we can highlight it on our website. And then the next slide. So again, this is a project that we had last year. It was our End Plastics in the Cafeteria campaign. So I don't know if many of you know this, but the #1 source for plastic waste in schools is the cafeteria. Lots of single-use plastic being used there. So we created this series of lessons where students do a kind of plastic audit in the cafeteria, see how much plastic waste is being used. And then there's a letter writing campaign where students write to their local school board members advocating for the removal of single-use plastics in the cafeteria. So this is a great way to get your students involved locally and make sure that that the plastics problem is addressed in a local manner. Um, so those two were kind of things that you can do in the classroom, but in terms of kind of more civic engagement here, we have our State of Climate interactive map. So like I mentioned earlier, there's only one state right now that has climate education standards embedded in all subject areas and all grade levels. But there are other states that are working towards a couple of different things. I think Carter mentioned New York has a couple of bills in progress. I know that in Maine, they have some professional development for educators. So if you and your students are interested, you guys can click on any state on the map and it'll kind of give you a brief overview of the current state of climate education policy in that state, but it also lists contact information for lawmakers who could definitely make some changes. And it even has a little letter template there so that you can send to the legislators to advocate for comprehensive climate education. So definitely a great resource that we have on our website. And then another thing that Earth Day is a part of is we are part of the Coalition for Climate Education Policy, and there's a great toolkit, and I think Judy mentioned it in the chat there. So this is a great resource that can kind of help you create policy that can be enacted in your state or in your community. So you can do this with your students, or if you're just very passionate about getting climate education into the standards. You can take this policy toolkit and it gives you kind of a step-by-step guide on how to assess the current state of climate education policy in your area and then how to craft legislation so that the students get access to quality climate education. So definitely a really powerful toolkit. Like I said, there's lots of good work happening. New York is definitely coming along. There's actually a committee hearing today in Oregon about a bill that will enact comprehensive climate education. So even if you have time after this webinar, I think they still are taking submissions for testimony. So if you want to help Oregon pass comprehensive climate education, you can definitely check it out. But yeah, definitely use this policy toolkit and you can help make change happen in your own state.
Yeah, these are so great, such great resources. I've had a great time exploring them. And yeah, so I want to get to your Q&A and hear a little bit more from you all. But first, just to highlight a little bit more about how you can stay involved with us and catch some more opportunities to learn about climate change education and more about what we're doing. We have some events coming up. So CFR Education is going to be partnering with the American Museum of Natural History and National Geographic to host a webinar in connection with Earth Day, and that will be on April 22nd. So definitely catch that. It's going to be really great. And Dennis, I'll let you talk a little bit about Earth Day Live because I don't want to mischaracterize anything.
Yeah. So we are putting together a great event with Take Action Global and a couple other partners there you can see called Coding for Climate. So it's not too late to sign up, but basically, if you sign up for this event, you get some resources that'll help your students kind of code different activities that solve uh, climate issues such as plastic pollution or deforestation, and it kind of frames it in a different way so students are able to use technology to come up with their own solutions. And again, what I love about this project, Coding for Climate, is that it's very solutions based. So students have kind of a positive mindset and try to tackle this in the classroom. And then the event is kind of a big celebration where we'll zoom into classrooms all over the world and they'll be able to showcase um, their different projects that they have been working on for the past month.
That sounds really great. And Carter, I'm just seeing your question come in. I'm assuming that it might be for K through 12. It's just been answered, but yeah, we tend to, as an organization, focus on both. So we try to provide our resources and support for both K through 12 and higher education settings. Um, but both of these events are more specifically tailored for K through 12. So on top of these events, just to sort of plug our things, so definitely encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. You'll be able to keep it up to date with all of our new materials and events. But on top of that, it's not just climate change here. It's the range of all of our coverage, from some geography focused content, some history focused content, fundamentals on all sorts of international affairs topics. But including climate change as well. And in a similar vein, definitely encourage you to follow us on our social media channels. You'll be able to keep up to date there. And Dennis can direct you to his social channels.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention there. So we have the Earth Day Network one. So that one posts about a lot of different topics, including some of our tree planting campaigns, our cleanup campaign. But then we also have our Earth Day educators social media. And so that one's more K through 12 focused. And then you could always email us. And I'm definitely going to take that suggestion from Elizabeth about adding some of the policy currently in DC to the state map. So thank you for highlighting that, Elizabeth.
Awesome. Yeah. So thank you all again so much for being here with us. And we'd love to take any questions that you might have. I see that we have one in the chat, which is from Stephen. How do K through 12 educators in quote unquote red states advocate for climate change education given the current administration's climate change denial? So I'll definitely share from my end, but I'm sure Dennis, you might have some insights on this too. But for our purpose, we really try to ground climate education in sort of already established curricula. So, I think Dennis mentioned actually in one of his earlier responses, but we're really trying to kind of find connections and how things, everything's a climate story in a way. So for instance, if you're in a history class or an English class and you're teaching about the Dust Bowl, there's a climate narrative there that you can sort of tie into. The other aspect to this is we really try to approach our resources from the perspective of issues and policies and sort of defining kind of issues that people are facing. So not necessarily trying to push specific agendas, but actually trying to just give students a better understanding of how the world works around these problems. A good example for this would be our simulations. So, uh, a simulation on climate policy can include a variety of different perspectives. It's not necessarily advocating one way or the other, but actually just prompting students to explore the topic at a fundamental level from a policymaker's perspective, and really just kind of ground themselves in the actual sort of root debates surrounding these issues rather than necessarily sort of set an agenda. Um, and the other kind of tie-in to, integrating it across curriculum is, there's a lot of ways that we are recovering climate change or climate topics that aren't necessarily directly related to that sort of buzzword of climate change. So a good example of this is our collection of resources in our new climate library that focuses on energy challenges. Energy has always been a factor in our life. It's always been a political issue and an issue for civic education, how to sort of navigate issues of state and federal energy policy, energy security, all topics that I think are related to climate change, but not necessarily explicitly tied to some of the more kind of hot button aspects of the issue. Um, all of these can kind of, I think, help integrate climate education into a setting that it might otherwise not necessarily receive a great reception in. But Dennis, I'm sure that this is something that you focus on a lot too, so I want to give you a chance to respond to.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything you just said. I'm going to kind of answer this from a slightly different perspective. So, in meetings that I've had with lawmakers who may not have the same kind of leanings as I do, then, what I try to approach as in some of those different um, kind of three pillars that I mentioned. So, I think when you mention preparing students for the economy and making sure that you bring up those statistics that, some of the fastest growing jobs, some of the highest paying jobs all have to do with getting students ready for the green economy. I think no one's going to say, I don't want my students to be ready for this industry that's worth billions and billions of dollars. So we try to frame it kind of from that perspective. And then another thing too is kind of the climate anxiety. So, it's an issue that regardless of of the lawmakers' leanings, you want to address these topics that are giving students anxiety. So I think when you frame it from some of those different pillars, it gives them, it causes them to really make sure that these are issues that are talked about. So definitely, just to reiterate what Ian said, tying it to some of the different subjects, that's important, and just making sure that they can view from different perspectives.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely keep asking questions. We got one here that's do earthdata.org and CFR have any educator networks? And this is a great question. I'll speak from our end. We definitely do. We have an ambassador network for both high school and higher ed teachers, instructors who want to, get more involved. And we host regular meetings with them, and they're really productive. At least on our end, I can definitely say, we really get a lot out of being engaged with these communities. But I hope we can also provide some resources for educators to, help better incorporate our resources into their classroom materials. But yeah, Dennis, how about from your end?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, the Earth Day representatives campaign. So that is a great way for teachers to network and connect and talk about some of the different lessons that they're doing in their classroom, highlighting them and getting resources. And it's a great opportunity for educators to communicate too. So our Earth Day representatives campaign is our educator network.
Great. Yeah. Well, any other questions? Or if not, this seems like a pretty good place to leave it, a good plug to join our educator networks and get involved. But yeah, I just want to reiterate, huge thanks to Dennis and earthday.org for teaming up with us to host this session. Thanks to all of our team for helping us put this on, for being wizards in the chat and providing all these links. But also just a huge thanks to you all for coming and for being engaged. And as a reminder, we'll email you with a recording of this session and a list of helpful links. But please also feel free to reach out to us with any other questions that you have, or if you want any additional information. You can reach us at our email, which is CFR Education at CFR.org, or no, sorry, education at CFR.org. And yeah, it's really been a pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah,
Oh,
thank you,
thanks in the chat
Ian, and
for
thank you,
correcting us.
CFR, yeah, for hosting us. And yeah, no, it was a great conversation. I hope a lot of people got a lot of great resources and out of this. And make sure again, like I said, it's the 55th year anniversary of Earth Day, this April 22nd. So definitely make sure that you celebrate it by doing either a cleanup, a tree planting, or like we mentioned here, integrating some kind of climate education lesson into your classroom.
That's great. Well, congrats on 55 too. Great. Well, thanks everyone, and hopefully see you all soon in the real world.